Following the chaotic draw at the First Battle of Capua, the decision by the Roman consuls Flaccus and Appius to split up and march their armies in opposite directions was a masterclass in strategic evasion. On the fields in front of Capua, they recognized Hannibal's tactical superiority. They simply could not win a pitched battle against him. By splitting their forces, they forced Hannibal into a difficult choice. He could not chase and destroy both armies simultaneously. But this was not Roman cowardice. This was Roman pragmatism and their ability to see the bigger strategic picture. The ultimate goal of the maneuver of consuls Quintus Fulvius Flaccus and Appius Claudius Pulcher was to bait Hannibal into leaving Capua. They knew that Hannibal actively pursued pitched battles in the hope of destroying entire Roman armies, because otherwise he could not win the war of attrition. So the two consuls calculated that by offering themselves as targets retreating in different directions, Hannibal would give chase, which would leave Capua vulnerable. And give chase he did. I have a good one for you today. A longtime fan of HistoryMarche created Dread Admiral, a brutal tactical naval strategy game. Command a persistent fleet through a hostile archipelago while being relentlessly hunted by the Black Fleet. The game emphasizes high-stakes survival. Every ship lost is gone forever, and if your flagship is destroyed, the run is over. You must constantly balance progressing objectives against the escalating pressure of the pursuing enemy. Do you fight to gather more resources, or flee to buy time? Players can heavily customize their flagship, adding planes, turrets, HP, and unlock various fleet-wide perks. Survival demands mastering complex turn-based combat against an adaptive AI that dynamically alters its fleet composition and economy to counter your every move. Dread Admiral is perfect for players who crave a brutal challenge. You will lose, you will make tough decisions, fail objectives, and run out of time, but you will also eke out victory by the slimmest of margins. All round, Dread Admiral is a well-thought-out game, and it's made by a member of the HistoryMarche community. Wishlist the game on Steam today to support a fellow creator. Link is in the description. Flaccus marched west towards the city of Cumae. This was an unfavorable target for Hannibal, due to its heavy fortifications and a port where Roman ships could resupply Flaccus through the city's port. So Hannibal went after Appius, who headed south into the rugged region of Lucania. This was the beating heart of Hannibal's power base in Italy. Many tribes and cities in Lucania, Bruttium and Apulia had defected to Carthage. Hannibal could not allow a consular army of 20,000 to march unchecked in the region. But Appius knew he was acting as bait. He wasn't looking for a fight. Marching at a punishing pace, Appius used narrow passes, steep river valleys, and local guides to keep his army moving ahead of the Carthaginian vanguard. On his trail was Hannibal. Leaving his heavy baggage behind, the Carthaginian general drove his stripped-down veteran strike force relentlessly. But while the Numidian cavalry tried to sniff out Appius, another Roman army appeared from the north. Marcus Centenius Penula, a former centurion granted a special command by a desperate senate, was marching toward the Silarus River. Unlike Appius, Penula was not running. He was actively hunting Hannibal. Deep in the Lucanian wilderness, Appius finally managed to completely break line of sight with Carthaginian scouts, effectively vanishing in the mountains. Hannibal was forced to halt his strike force. He immediately fanned his elite Numidian outriders to pick up the consul's scent. But the scouts could not locate Appius's tracks. Instead, they detected an unfamiliar Roman army approaching the Silarus River. Penela had explicitly promised the Roman Senate that he would use his insider knowledge of Lucania to destroy the Carthaginian general. Thus, retreating would have been a political humiliation. When Penela realized that Hannibal's army was directly in front of him, he drew his men up for battle on the plain near the river. Penela charged with his men with frantic bravery. But it quickly became clear that this wasn't a drilled Roman army. He commanded 8,000 regular soldiers, half Roman citizens, half Italian allies, and 8,000 raw volunteers who had joined him on his march south. They had zero cohesion, poor discipline, and a commander who had never led an army in the field. Hannibal, meanwhile, fielded his 30,000-strong mobile strike force. These were the absolute elite of his army, the hardened African and Iberian heavy infantry, supported by his devastating heavy cavalry and agile Numidian light cavalry. Drunk on his own hubris, Penela crashed into the Carthaginian line. For a time, they managed to hold the Carthaginian infantry at bay. Despite the horrific mismatch, the engagement lasted for about 2 hours, driven entirely by Roman desperation and pride. But while the infantry was locked in combat, Hannibal's vastly superior cavalry easily swept the Roman horsemen from the field. By this point, Hannibal had realized that he had confronted a disjointed Roman army. He was likely amused that Penela offered him a pitched battle. With the Roman cavalry routed, Hannibal's riders were free to wheel around and hit the Roman infantry lines from the flanks and rear. At this point, the Roman commander may have realized that he marched his men straight into a meat grinder. To his credit, Penela did not hide in the rear. To prevent his green troops from breaking, he fought directly in the front ranks. The turning point of the battle came when he was overwhelmed by Carthaginian veterans and cut down. The untrained volunteers panicked first, breaking formation and turning to flee. This caused a chain reaction, and the Roman regular soldiers broke ranks shortly after. Fleeing from Hannibal's army on an open plain was a death sentence. The Carthaginian and Numidian cavalry ruthlessly hunted down the fleeing Romans. The battle devolved into a systematic massacre. Out of the 16,000 Roman and Allied soldiers who took the field, barely 1,000 men managed to escape the bloodbath and scatter into the Lucanian countryside. After the complete annihilation of Marcus Centenius Penela at the Battle of the Silarus, Hannibal did not linger to celebrate. Instead of continuing to scour the Lucanian mountains for Appius, Hannibal marched towards the neighboring region of Apulia. Abandoning the pursuit of the Roman army in Lucania came down to Hannibal's pragmatic approach to warfare. He was a brilliant tactician, and he recognized a sunk cost when he saw one. Spending weeks marching his elite strike force aimlessly through the rugged Lucanian wilderness to find an army that had likely already slipped away was a massive waste of time and energy. More importantly, his network of spies and scouts brought him urgent news. A Roman army of 18,000 men, commanded by Praetor Gnaeus Fulvius, was operating in Apulia, one of the crucial regions of Hannibal's Italian power base. He could not allow a Roman praetor to pillage his allies' lands, or he risked his entire alliance network collapsing. The Roman praetor was detected in the vicinity of Herdonia. At dawn, Hannibal marched his main heavy infantry out of his camp and drew them up in a standard battle line on the open plain. Gnaeus Fulvius was completely caught off guard. However, instead of fortifying his position, the praetor was eager to fight. He marched his 18,000 men out to meet Hannibal, believing this would be a traditional head-to-head pitched battle. The Roman legions clashed with the Carthaginian line. Hannibal's center gave way and moved back. For a brief moment, the Romans believed they were holding their own in a tough infantry fight. However, their attention was entirely fixed forward, exactly as Hannibal had planned. Once the Romans were fully committed and locked in melee combat, Hannibal gave the signal. 3,000 hidden light infantry erupted from the woods and scrub, some distance away from Hannibal's left wing, charging towards the exposed Roman flank. At the same time, 2,000 Numidian cavalry emerged in the Roman rear to take control of the roads, cut off the escape routes, and sweep into the undefended Roman camp. The previous night, Hannibal stealthily hid these troops in the woodlands flanking the battlefield and the roads behind the Roman army to cut off their retreat. The psychological shock of being suddenly attacked from all sides broke the Roman army almost instantly. Gnaeus Fulvius's battle line dissolved into sheer panic. What followed was not a battle, but an execution. Seeing his army collapsing, Gnaeus Fulvius committed the ultimate Roman disgrace. He abandoned his men. He mounted his horse and fled the battlefield with a small escort of roughly 200 cavalry. With their commander fleeing and trapped in a ring of Carthaginian steel, the Roman army was methodically cut down. Of the 18,000 troops, no more than 2,000 survived. In the span of just a few weeks, Hannibal had broken the siege of Capua and had annihilated 2 Roman armies, over 30,000 soldiers. But while Hannibal was busy wiping out Penela and Gnaeus Fulvius in Lucania and Apulia, consuls Flaccus and Appius turned their armies around and marched back towards Capua. Their retreat after the first battle of Capua was a calculated move to lure Hannibal away from Campania. For the first time, the Romans managed to turn their manpower advantage into a strategic advantage in Italy. And they timed it perfectly. It was now early autumn, and the campaign season was over. Hannibal was outmaneuvered. The 2 consular armies encamped outside Capua. Flaccus and Appius both realized they had to secure their supply lines to support their besieging army. The town of Casilinum, which sat on the crucial Volturnus River, was heavily fortified and turned into a grain depot. Additional forts were constructed downstream to the mouth of the river to secure the flow of supplies. In addition, fortifications of the port city of Puteoli were improved, and the town would serve as another grain depot. Lastly, Praetor Claudius Nero was ordered to bring his army from Suessula to join the siege. This was to be the complete encirclement of Capua. Further afield, the 2 consuls established a massive logistical pipeline. Grain was transported by land and sea from Etruria and parts of Campania, still loyal to Rome, and stored in Casilinum and Puteoli. All preparations were made to ensure the army was supplied for a potentially long siege. Once their supplies were secure, the Roman armies encircled Capua and began one of the most impressive engineering feats of the Second Punic War. They constructed a continuous double-ringed system of fortifications around the massive city. Circumvallation, the inner wall, was meant to seal off Capua and prevent any messengers or foragers from slipping out, and block the Capuan garrison from launching sudden sallies against the Roman camps. Contravallation, the outer wall, faced outward towards the Campanian plains. The consuls knew Hannibal would eventually return to save his allies. This outer wall served to protect the Roman rear from a Carthaginian relief force. These were not simple wooden fences. They were heavy military earthworks designed to withstand a massive assault. Roman legionaries dug deep, wide trenches around the entire perimeter. The excavated dirt was piled up to create high, steep earthen ramparts. Heavy wooden palisades were driven into the ramparts, and fortified watchtowers were constructed at regular intervals along the walls, providing high ground to shoot down at attackers and keeping the perimeter under constant observation. By late autumn of 212 BC, the preparations were complete. Capua was cut off. The city would be starved out through the winter. On the other side of the Italian peninsula, Hannibal marched south to Tarentum. It might seem counterintuitive that, after securing 2 crushing victories at the Silarus and Herdonia, he did not turn his veteran army around and march straight back to Campania to save Capua. But the men needed rest. Moreover, Hannibal's decision to move south into winter quarters was dictated by harsh logistical realities. Marching back to heavily contested Campania in the winter meant risking mass starvation of his own troops. In winter, crops are dead and foraging is nearly impossible. An army of 30,000 men and thousands of horses cannot survive without steady supply of provisions. In addition, the Carthaginian army was slowed down by loot and prisoners taken during the summer campaign of 212 BC. The plunder had to be processed and the captives sold into slavery to fund the war effort. Thus, Hannibal did not abandon Capua. He simply recognized that the window for a rapid military rescue in 212 BC had closed. He moved south to winter his troops, process his loot, and prepare to break the Roman siege the following spring. But the biggest reason for wintering in Tarentum was its citadel, the strategic holy grail of the Carthaginian war effort in Italy. During the bitter cold, Hannibal tightened the noose around the Roman garrison. Earthworks were strengthened, and a trench was dug that now completely severed the citadel from the city and the mainland. By sea, the blockade was equally absolute. Hannibal's engineers transported the entire Tarentine fleet overland to launch them into open waters. They built custom-wheeled wagons and hoisted the warships onto beds braced with massive timber that could support the curved V-shaped keels and hold the heavy galleys upright. The carriages were fitted with massive solid wooden wheels capable of bearing the immense weight of the ships without splintering. The main city streets were widened, cleared of any obstacles, and dirt was leveled to ensure the carriage would not get bogged down or hit uneven ground that could tip the ships. Finally, draft animals and a complex system of levers, pulleys, and ropes were used to haul the ships over the peninsula. It was a monumental engineering feat to transport the ships, each weighing between 40 and 100 tons. By moving the ships overland, Hannibal bypassed the Roman citadel, which controlled the harbour mouth, and successfully launched the ships into open waters. The Tarentine fleet was formidable enough that Rome, already battling the Carthaginian fleet across the Mediterranean, would be unable to challenge the blockade. Trapped behind Hannibal's earthworks and hemmed in by hostile warships, the Roman garrison under Marcus Livius Macatus faced the harshest months of the siege. The defenders knew they were entirely on their own. In fact, the Republic would be unable to punch even a limited supply convoy through the tight naval blockade until 210 BC. Inside the fortress, famine hollowed the cheeks of the Roman legionaries. The men were cold, sick, and surviving on minute rations that were barely enough to keep them standing. Macatus and his legionaries knew they might not survive the winter, but with sheer Roman grit, they stubbornly refused to yield the citadel. While Hannibal tried to break Roman resistance in Tarentum, Carthage waged a war in its own backyard. Hasdrubal Barca disembarked at Rusadir to hunt down Syphax, who was defeated by Massinissa the year prior and retreated to western Numidia to rebuild his army. However, Hasdrubal's sudden departure to Africa pulled a large portion of his veteran army away from the Roman front in Iberia. Seizing this golden opportunity, the Roman commanders, brothers Publius and Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio, launched a major offensive south of the Ebro River. Mago Barca was left with a depleted force of 13,500 troops to maintain the entire theatre. Half of his army was protecting Carthago Nova, while he dispersed the other half to safeguard the vital southern silver mines and suppress local revolts. Stretched thin across the peninsula, he lacked the manpower to stop the Roman offensive of 30,000 troops. The main target of the Roman campaign was the coastal stronghold of Saguntum, the very city whose siege had ignited the Second Punic War years prior. The Scipios successfully occupied the city and established a vital Roman logistical base deep within enemy territory. With Hasdrubal in Africa, it appeared Rome had permanently broken Carthage's grip on Iberia. Meanwhile, Marcus Valerius Livinus's diplomatic mission in Greece hit pay dirt. After prolonged negotiations, he successfully forged an alliance with the Aetolian League and the Kingdom of Pergamum against Macedon. This, in effect, triggered the First Macedonian War, pinned Philip V in Greece, and ensured that his phalanxes would never be coming to Italy. Back in Rome, the Senate adjusted its political machinery to deal with the siege of Capua. Gnaeus Fulvius Centumalus and Publius Sulpicius Galba were elected consuls for the year 211 BC. But the Senate extended the commands of Flaccus and Appius as proconsuls, which meant that the ring of earthworks around Capua would not lose its commanders during the political transition. The siege would continue without interruption throughout the winter. As the year closed, the Mediterranean stood in a deceptive equilibrium. Hannibal remained undefeated in the field, yet Rome's asymmetric multi-theatre strategy was finally bearing fruit. With Philip paralyzed, Iberia compromised, and Capua suffocating, the Republic believed it had finally wrested the initiative from Carthage across the Mediterranean world. But the tactical chessboard of 212 BC was merely a prelude. Neither Rome nor Carthage could foresee the bloody campaigns that awaited them in 211 BC. I appreciate you being here for the video. Please give that subscribe button a gentle medieval slap and tickle the like button to appease the almighty algorithm. It will help out the channel greatly. Cheers.